Nothing is more perilous than boredom. Boredom is Satan. Like, people always say the devil's greatest trick is to deceive the world that he doesn't exist or whatever. Well, that's boredom. It will deceive you into all kinds of evils you wouldn't normally be capable of, and simultaneously convince you that you have all kinds of less banal reasons than being bored to do whatever it is you're doing. Do you honestly think you're bored today? Well, tough titmouse, son. Your boredom ain't got nothin' on the boredom of the past. No television, no video games, no telephones and social media, and that's just the last half century or so. Go back even further to the life of a hunter-gatherer society. You're more animal than human back then, eating to live instead of living to eat, as they say. I think when you think about the massive plethora of boredom that existed in the past, that one of the greatest tricks boredom has invented along the way is actually a religion. I mean, think about it. What is more compelling than a sense of purpose to all this madness of being alive? And it needed to be written in such a way to perfectly appeal to what can both easily be understood by the whole of culture and to the general sense of festering self-righteousness of the ego. It needed to make you feel like a part of something important, even if all these morals are actually secretly making hypocrites of us all. I think the deeper truth of religion is revealed when, even though it's been around for so long, we're still stuck in the same kind of samsara of continuing to make the same mistakes, being consumed by our sins instead of choosing right action when we can recognize it. The ego is very tricky like that, where every villain is the hero of their own story. Every prisoner earnestly believes that they don't deserve to be there. There's, I think, a deep sense of irony to it, though, in that through religions like Christianity, we fetishize things like redemption and sacrifice, yet are unable to take steps to avoid having to do either in the first place. It's almost infantile when I think about it clearly, asking for some kind of a higher figure in the place of perhaps a parent to lift us up because, oh, I am weak and of the flesh only through an external force which I can, apparently, never comprehend in totality can I ever become a better human being. But do you see the obvious fallacy in this kind of logic? It is self-deprecating in the highest degree. I think this is a kind of absolvement of responsibility. Willpower is a funny thing, though. It is, in a way, true that we are not entirely responsible for our actions because we live in a chaotic world full of lies that mislead us. But do you really want to just give in and say that you can't do any better without a savior? This is one of the things that Christianity does that makes me think it was at least partially made for the sake of control over the general population. People today are just like worker drones, which of course means the control methods in place are working perfectly. Another thing Christianity stresses is be thankful. It's never like, don't you want more? That's something the devil would say. So in a way, this makes us complicit in our position in society. Every man will be a king, they say. But you can't be a king yet until your Lord comes down and smites all those sinners, all those people who wanted more. I have my own fair criticisms of Alan Watts, but one thing he says that I think has a lot of value is deeply asking oneself, what do you truly desire? And if you, quote, had real nerve, you'd see it right away, end quote. He's talking about enlightenment, but I think the same is true for the facades that society puts up. We invent all these propagandas to convince ourselves that we're doing things right. But again, I see in society the same trappings that are essentially boredom gone manic. We have conversations that are exceptionally shallow just to fill in social gaps and turn ourselves into entertainers rather than actualized people. There is, I feel, in society, a cancer of optimism because it's just easier to communicate that way, not because it's actually true. This is why oftentimes, if you watch a movie or TV show that involves mind reading, you always witness the character having to deal with extremely negative thoughts and judgments from others. It's because the negativity doesn't vanish just because you've covered it with a veneer of positivity. There's actually a great movie on Netflix that addresses this kind of a false positivity called The Show, where in the beginning the main character risks his life to save a contestant on a show where a woman compete to marry a millionaire and he tries to save her from a losing contestant who goes on a violent rampage using a firearm. I want to quote his speech that he gives in a live studio audience when he is interviewed. "Now, what was going through your mind when you first heard the gunshots? Honestly?" he asks. "Yes, honestly. We're all about honesty on Morning Show USA. Honestly, I was thinking about my job and what a giant mess this was going to cost our network. Here I was lying next to a man who had just been murdered, and all I could think about was myself. It was not your fault. Actually, it was my fault. And it was your fault. And it was our network's fault. And it was the millions of people who tune in each week's fault. We're sitting here celebrating me, trying to cover the fact that we pitted two women against each other like a couple of effing dogs. What happened on my show, that was not an accident. That was inevitable. Is a desperate rage festering in this country, and we're too afraid to show it to you. Instead, we numb ourselves with our stupid effing morning shows and soap operas and reality shows. It's disgusting. I was told to come out here and say that Jessica, the woman who murdered the man in the game show, was sick and that it was just a game. But I can't do that. Jessica was not sick. She was a beautiful human being under an incredible amount of pressure and personal debt, and we played with her heart for our own financial gain. And I'm glad that people saw that, the murder. That is the most reality TV has ever shown, and I hope that we show more of it." "Well, I guess you're in the minority there," the host says. Every day, people lie to themselves thinking that we live in a fair and rational society. But truly, we live in a world of dogs. We are ravenous for more money and fame. There is a constant play on ulterior motives that can go unnoticed if you allow it to. Even when it's obvious and clearly displayed, like in a game show, like what happened in the movie, we still lie to ourselves. When a contestant loses in a game show, they put on a smile and the winner gives them a pat on the back. Meanwhile, juxtapose that against what you think is really happening in their mind. But it's easy, isn't it? Easy to just pretend that hurt feelings don't lurk beneath the surface, wanting to be released on a flash of violence, like what happened in the show. There is, I think, a kind of irony to the false pretenses we create here when we simultaneously live in a society which embraces the ideologies of capitalism so strongly. And by capitalism, I specifically mean the way in which we believe in competition in the marketplace, and the kind of winner-take-all mentality that comes with it. It's all very kill or be killed. The spirit of competition is a bit dualistic in that way. We're supposed to avoid being sore losers, but simultaneously pour our entire soul into trying to win. It makes me think of enlightenment again, actually, because on one level we're supposed to be all zen and disaffected by negative circumstances, but at the same time there's a truth in the darker nature of the shadow or more primal self that is ever present within. I suppose there's a virtue in both, but there is never a virtue in dishonesty, and we create that dishonesty when we put on a show of ourselves. I've seen a movie called The Invention of Lying, which would probably make you think that always telling the truth is a bad thing, but I disagree with the fundamental concepts the movie displays. Society as a whole would evolve differently if people were unable to lie. So while I enjoyed the movie, I don't think it offers much more than a superficial take on why people lie and the effects lying has on culture. People could no longer really be fakes or phonies in the simple sense that their intentions would be so dismally transparent that it would undermine their basic social constructs. So perhaps in some ways, yes, we would become offensive when we express negative opinions of other people, but we would also better understand the way in which we are viewed and actually grow to stop caring about such trivial things. Because when a person insults you for your appearance or whatever they're making a superficial judgment of, these insults would become meaningless, and we would have to actually get to know a person to make judgments on their character in order to make them feel bad. But then that becomes less like an insult and more like a constructive criticism, and there's a kind of neuroticism when it comes to constructive criticisms in culture. They are vastly different from insults, but oftentimes we may interpret them as being the same thing. I remember I used to watch American Idol, and I hated Paula Abdul as much as I loved Simon Cowell. Paula would always focus on the positives, and even if I felt like the singer didn't do so well or was just mediocre, she would laud on the compliments. Meanwhile, Simon would say what he actually thought, and I felt when he did so, his criticisms actually had depth that could be used by the singer to perhaps learn from and improve their future performances. And yet, despite this simple reality that the singer could learn more from Simon than Paula, Simon was constantly getting booed. George Carlin also says some similar things about culture, like how we're always giving away participation awards in children's sports so that every competitor feels validated and that they at least tried. This creates a false promise for their future in the adult world where you are judged based on your merit and not on whether or not you merely tried. Not only that, but it creates a system where we seek out validation from society as a whole in order to make ourselves feel whole. So not only are we made in this way less capable, but also less independent. And then you enter the school system, where it enters the more mature level at middle school, and suddenly you have to apply all this rigor. And what are you really learning here? Again, to be a worker drone. There's actually a great post I found on Tumblr, I think many of you will find relatable, about how school doesn't actually train you to be a capable person who can deal with society's pressures that I'll quote for you. Being 18 to 25 is like playing a video game where you skip the tutorial and you're just sort of running around with no idea how anything works. Next post, being 25 to 30 is like later on in the game when you figured out how things work, but have made poor leveling decisions along the way and are now horribly underpowered for what you're supposed to be doing. Next post, being 30 to 35 is coming to the conclusion that if wildly swinging a sword at random while screaming has gotten you this far, may as well keep at it. End quote. It's truly a broken system. It's just busy work, really, with the exception of English class, in my experience. And there, I've had some good experience, but you still need a good teacher. Sometimes it's just dull topics, but you can teach yourself to think, at the very least. In fact, it's worse than a broken system. What it is a trap. At around the age I made my old intellectual videos, I was beginning to question what I really wanted from society. I started to search for ways out of the trap. Money is the cheese that they lay to catch you in it, and for a long time I listened to Alan Watts talk about living like money was no object. But I began to face my own sense of boredom. What did I really want out of my life if not money? Sure, I just needed enough to get by, but what would I do with my time if not going out on materialistic expenditures like my peers would? Well, it turned out I would tread a path completely unpaved by anyone and discover no less than magic. I won't go into it here, but please check out my video on spirituality if you're curious. The average person would think I'm no less than that, and I understand they are just living in the Matrix, but it works for me, and that's all that matters. I'm glad I've found my own path in health and spirituality, but the path I've found is far too difficult to find to ever be treaded upon by the masses. So most people will just be stuck pursuing things that are false idols, alcohol, selling their souls for a paycheck, stuck in the cycles created by phony self-improvement peddlers. I can't imagine, really, being anyone else. In a way, I think I'm just, very picky. It took me years upon years to figure out my life path. When I look back at how long it took me, it gives me a sense of appreciation for all I've learned. But simultaneously, it's burdensome because I wonder how other people can live with themselves treading the dark catacombs of ignorance. But it's like most people are hypnotized, completely convinced of the hex. They bow in subservience to the very forces that keep them stuck in dismal situations. And it's because they lack imagination more than anything. They have been made tame and strangely happy, or at least seemingly happy. But this way of being tame, it makes them also soulless to a large extent. Conformism is a highly malicious force that keeps it stuck in shallow cycles of all kinds. Thank God for the internet and for Burning Man, some of the greatest bastions of hope for humanity today. Also Terence McKenna. If you're unfamiliar with his work, I think he is probably the best philosopher to grace the modern era. In my opinion, he relies too much on psychedelics as a means of gaining insight, but I would have to agree that they can be great catalysts. When I did LSD, I entered a kind of social void that consumed me and stretched the psychology of my anxiety to its breaking point. It seemed like everyone wanted to psychically kill me, but I was able to actually overcome it in the single most difficult hour or two of my entire life. Steve Jobs, by the way, once said that doing LSD was one of the 2 or 3 most important things he's done in his life, and I can identify with that a bit. When I overcame it, I was very socially dominant, which is highly unusual for me, and I think I learned about how spirituality relates to my social anxiety. And no, I don't think doing LSD caused my schizophrenia, because it's been statistically proven that there is no higher incidence of mental illness among groups of people who have done psychedelics in their life. It's unfortunate that we're stuck in a society that can't appreciate any level of spirituality and chooses to inebriate itself into a drunken stupor rather than the pursuit of high knowledge. These traditions are shells that we have to cast out. There is no end to the amount of experiences we could be having, but we are sticklers for doing what we're told, and what we are told is to just do as your father and his father before him did. These are fables, and fine, okay, they serve a purpose, but there is so much more beauty in the world than we can even comprehend right now. Burning Man just proves that, and it seems to me like the principles of living in harmony with the planet just come naturally to people who have the capacity for comprehending real creativity. Strange how that happens, but it harkens back to my theory that boredom correlates with the creation of religion and needing purpose. I'm not trying to say religion itself is a problem. My critique is less ideological and more societal, in that I'm analyzing the constructs it creates in culture on the collective level. I would bet that the Bible itself is a very inspired and even psychedelic work, but run through the filter of culture and ideology, which, as we know from Terence McKenna, are not our friends, it becomes toxic. So if you're religious and hearing this, I mean no offense. I have no qualms with you at an individual level. One could even make a case that the source of religion, by its nature, is schizophrenic, the name of which has been tarnished by modern psychology. As a person who has dealt with both harrowing mental health crises and has been hospitalized several times, I can conclude that there is almost no merit to the current system of regulating mental health. What you call mental health is systemic oppression of what culture refuses to understand. I remember when I first came in for an appointment for psychiatry that I was asked the question, "Do you think of yourself as a spiritual person?" At first the question confused me. I couldn't fathom how that was important to the topic at hand, but I now realize that this question bears implications that resemble Nazism. I have been bearing the brunt of what can be described as no less than spiritual torture for my entire adult life. I'm sure that if you were my psychiatrist, you would say that it is important that I express this to you to better your understanding of my symptoms, but you actually don't want to understand the full depths of what I feel. You should seek to actively deny the real presence of the spiritual and any value it may hold. It is required for the continuation of your existence as an institution that you view all spiritual phenomena as problematic, and with that same kind of reductionist viewpoint you can do nothing but harm. It is the exact same kind of attitude that man has taken towards nature, something that must be conquered rather than integrated. The Native Americans understood the integration of nature into their version of society, and it is no wonder that many tribes then and now commonly incorporated sacramental use of psychedelic drugs. I have done psychedelic drugs 3 times in my life, twice intentionally and once accidentally through part of a sugarcane plant I consumed. I strongly believe that there is an immense value in these experiences, but understand that I am not a druggie, and I don't really intend to do these things ever again in my life. But I bring up these drugs for an important reason. They amplify such feelings of spirituality and can grant one much insight, but this insight is made out to be on the level of pure delusion. Tell me this. Why would a drug, something that exists in nature, cause any and every person who takes it to feel something that is considered delusional to society? Why would nature create such a thing? The only answer is because society itself bears delusions about the nature of reality. because these drugs are not creating illusions, they are temporarily granting one the ability to perceive in ways they did not before. To society, anything that challenges the prevailing ideology must be oppressed and made illegal. There's absolutely no question that weed should be legalized. The problem that we have with it today is in two fronts. The front of hierarchical, authoritarian society maintaining a rule over our minds, traditions, and beliefs, and secondly, the imperative towards maintaining control over the working class of America through drugs which maintain the operative hive mind, keep it from devising strong countercultural beliefs which are actually necessary for us to grow. Yes, people who take drugs can be delusional, and this is where you see the essential fallacy society is making. It makes a kind of broad stroke that paints anyone who uses a psychedelic drug as delusional, just because not everyone knows how to responsibly handle them and use the enhanced perceptions they offer in order to gain insight. There is, I think, a kind of catch-22 at play here, whereby society says nothing can be gained from these drugs, which causes the mindset opposed to the idea psychedelics inspire, which say, in opposition, society doesn't want you to understand because it is in society's nature to be controlling, to be invalidated as an idea, thereby creating this cycle where questioning society is intrinsically wrong. Like, you make it illegal to take something, which makes people question why it is illegal, you see? That is the value in these drugs. Interestingly enough, in the game Bloodborne, one gains insight through the use of items called Madman's Wisdom, which then allow them to see things which they previously could not without said insight. You would call these things hallucinations, but that word is a gross oversimplification. Terence McKenna has written a book called True Hallucinations, and this title alone speaks for the whole of what I am trying to say. When one experiences a hallucination, it is not a pure conjuring out of nothing. It is a manifestation of deep inner psychological processes. Furthermore, these visions are not purely born out of the psyche of the observer, but they are also connected to the spiritual reality, which is the uniting force of all consciousnesses that exist on this planet. The force of what I call scientism does not allow you to deem real that which cannot be measured. So it goes that you do not know where life comes from. You do not understand why life exists as it does. You do not know what you are apart from your ego identity. You do not comprehend the exact reason beauty exists in nature and art. You cannot understand anything except in terminologies in which things are identified, such as chemicals in the brain are given names. The answer to all of these questions are found in spiritual truths that are derived from spiritual insight. All life is connected by the spiritual world, so by that extension, there is a certain insight and truth I can develop by observing my hallucinations. Hallucinations are always unique to the person experiencing them, and this is because they are meant to symbolize something to the person experiencing them, and through the processing of hallucinations, one's consciousness can gain wisdom into whatever their individual spiritual process is. I can use myself as an example only because it is beyond my capacity to fully understand the whole of another person's psyche and pinpoint exactly why they might have a specific hallucination. For me, I fear people's judgments, and I want to change their minds about fundamental things, such as this very thing I am talking to you about. The things I must face on my journey are the skepticisms and oppression of other people, and whatever their preconceptions and judgments may lead them to thinking about me. It is vital that I comprehend the full extent to which people think about the things I wish to communicate to them for the success of my journey, and understand the blockages keeping them from understanding me. It is also crucial for my development as an individual with social understandings of others that I understand the nature of how people's opinions cause me anxiety. In this way, schizophrenia is a waking dream. Psychology today does not understand why dreaming occurs, but I can tell you very plainly, it is the subconscious running through its various concepts itself, an understanding of perceptions that form our ability to comprehend both self and other in order to maintain and develop what we need in order to have a consistent sense of self and reality, like running simulations, kind of. So the schizophrenic merely extends the dreaming mind out into the world, and this creates the disorder. But it is more than a disorder. Psychology does not understand why disorders occur. They cannot, because to recognize the truth of mental disorders, you have to understand that there is another side of the coin to the negative half of disorders, and that is what they enable the mind to do. There's a lot of emphasis on psychedelic communities that when someone takes a drug, there is no such thing as a bad trip, but only a challenging trip instead. This starts to go now into my theory of how the body uses energy to facilitate what is most necessary for the mind. It's somewhat complicated, but in its bare essentials it says that any form of stress is an indicator of something that should be addressed by the individual, whether it is a need or a want, and that when someone like me experiences a hallucination that is a negative stressor, it's because my brain is trying to learn how to better address the root cause of that stressor. So what I'm trying to say is that these hallucinations have a use. Yes, they are also a disability in that they make it harder for me to function as a normal human. But consider that maybe I don't want to function like a normal human. I want to use the full extent of my power as an individual to enact change in the world. So while I do not consciously choose to experience schizophrenia, my body has decided that in order to comprehend the extent of the task at hand, that experiencing these hallucinations is a necessary chore, because the more I am exposed to the negative stimuli, the more I can adapt to it, and learn to work through it, like in the real world. Any form of stress, mental or physical, is there to make you stronger so that you can survive and be effective in your various pursuits. We just don't understand to what extent this is true yet. Modern man has the same dispositions he has always had, namely, the same instincts for survival, the same genetic makeup, and the same needs and requirements for living on the planet. People with mental health disorders, especially schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, I believe possess this same genetic disposition to altered states of consciousness that were so beneficial to early man. They are the link to our past and the spirit, yet they are diagnosed as unwell, locked up in mental institutions and medicated, being shunned by society. It is this very connection with the spirit that was established by such people who enabled us to survive the ice ages, cross the ice floes, and allowed civilization to flourish as it has. What a difference from the role of the shaman in tribal society, where they are still revered and esteemed. The catalyst of our evolution is being rejected. I'm actually proud of my schizophrenia because I feel it has given me a very unique and perhaps even valuable kind of experience. I think that the things I feel have real relevance to the state of society and my place in it, even if those things are mostly negative, and in a way it feels natural to my brain because I have always had a very hyperactive mind, so it just feels rather like an extension of who I've always been as a person. It's strange and interesting that I used to have so many thoughts in my head, and while now my personal thoughts are quiet, it seems like any schizophrenic phenomena have just acted to fill the space of a mind that would have otherwise quieted down. I think that we all have inside of us a plethora of mental phenomena which lay dormant as nonverbal thoughts, and that the schizophrenic has merely incorporated these into his more active conscious thoughts and given them verbal form. I would even postulate that a spiritual realm exists that generates the hallucinations, but I cannot really say for sure. But I can say for sure that based on my LSD experience, there is an inner truth to be derived from shouldering the burden of negative hallucinations, because I was able to break through the negativity and my crippling social anxiety to become powerful as a social entity in a way that I never have before. To quote the band of Montreal, there's a value in things unpleasant, because pain is not pain in the sense that we normally think. Your body is your willpower personified, so when you are injured, the pain you feel is also the very act of your body trying to keep itself alive and thriving. To get better at anything, there's an element of pain and difficulty before there can be skill and ease. This applies to passive principles such as physical resilience and your emotional processing, as well as active skills. In Buddhism, I have even heard of a practice where during an intense meditation, Buddhists can invoke the spirits to basically tear them apart so that they are overcoming the spiritual hellfire they can become stronger and more immune to negative spirits, rather like exercise for a muscle that is internal rather than external. I feel the importance of this is where it relates to society's aversion to anything negative, a cancerous positivity, as I've said before. Sometimes the only way out of a negative situation is to go through it. Sometimes negative experiences are really teaching experiences, because unless you are deliberately hurting yourself, never do this, you are always moving towards a place of evolution or some process that removes any ignorance you may have. That's what the scientific method is, really. I even think society is, in a way that is mostly unintentional, a cult of anti-intellectualism. This is because the value of intellectualization is not always immediately apparent or gratifying. Sometimes higher thought is just a waste of thought. It does happen. It reminds me of the character Fury's opposition to the very concept of philosophy, because it is a distraction from useful action in the game Darksiders 3. So there is, and you may find this ironic, some potential virtue to the cult of anti-intellectualism. It's rather how Jordan Peterson says that cultural Marxism is partially right, since we've been successful in building a society that functions and seems to move towards become better with time. So we should be happy that we've accomplished that. But of course the downfall is that when there is something important to be discovered, and we've collectively ignored or even outright rebelled against it. Change can be difficult, especially when it's done on the scale of a whole society. But then again, I think most of us can agree that there's a lot that should, in fact, be changing in this so-called modern society of ours. I say so-called because I'm a strong supporter of a kind of archaic revival, as Terence McKenna has spoken of, so that we can reconnect not only with the spiritual knowledge of the past, but also better understand how social norms have changed for the worse. But apart from reverting to the past, I think more along the terms of the author Tom Robbins, who I will now quote as having said, "Our purpose is to consciously, deliberately evolve towards a wiser, more liberated and luminous state of being, to return to Eden, make friends with the snake, and set up our computers along the wild apple trees. Deep down, all of us are probably aware that some kind of mystical evolution is our true task, yet we suppress the notion with considerable force, because to admit it is to acknowledge that most of our political gyrations, religious dogmas, social ambitions, and financial ploys are not merely counterproductive, but trivial." End quote. And I agree, and I think that we are stuck in a very left-brain society that favors structure over the kind of freedom the heart seeks. In some ways, we are so smart that we're stupid. Like, did you know the person who invented television actually said that if he knew what it ended up being used for, he never would have invented it? Technology does not always make society better. Just look at the nuclear bomb. Social media has become a platform for narcissism, but social media is not to blame for this. We have to confront the worst aspects of our society in order to move beyond them. What social media does is take the aspects that already exist within the social reality and put a giant magnifying glass over them. Hopefully, if we're smart, we can take this opportunity to work on ourselves. The more we expose ourselves to each other socially, the more we can understand each other. I've seen this evolution happen on YouTube with the upvote system, creating a feedback loop that enables us to make better judgments and use logic more effectively. Because if you are primarily seeing the best options being shared, your opinions can shift towards that which is more true. And even if you disagree with them, then at least you're learning about how to, say, better frame your arguments against them. Know your enemy, as they say. Like, I hate the values held in exaltation by reality TV, but believe it or not, I actually watch it. Why? Because I'm learning how the cultural mainframe works. If you learn enough about how something works, you can break it efficiently. I'm not like a misanthrope, though. I see that culture is evolving in some ways. Joe Rogan is breaking into the mainstream. The internet is giving us the opportunity to have deep intellectual discussions. Psychedelics are gaining global recognition. There is real reason to hope, I believe. But we all have to arm ourselves for real psychological warfare. The problem with our society, perhaps the very largest one of all if you are able to see past the veil of obliviousness and positivity, is that we actually justify with morality our adherence towards certain processes of the mind which create / are central to culture. We have to go through a very dark night of the soul if we are going to continue on the path of evolution. It's like we are all going through a difficult collective psychedelic trip, and we need to wake up to the lessons it wants to teach us so we can learn to love each other. I want to be the shaman to us on that trip. Peace is the mission, but to get there we have to take the lessons of the left brain with us, and I am equipped with a special set of knowledge that will make it possible to reach a new plateau of evolution. I have total faith in this knowledge, and if it's not me or someone else who delivers us to understanding it, we are just, as Joe Rogan says, spinning our effing wheels. It's not that past philosophers have been wrong or that mankind is on the wrong track. The problem is one of origins, the origin of knowledge itself in a way. Since man has always sought complex systems and solutions which employ newness, he is misguiding himself towards an ever-increasing drive towards the perfection of certain systems, never knowing the importance of where knowledge initially comes from. The best example of this today is the way in which we are trying to define what is / isn't healthy for you. It's in constant despair for any true definition, because man thinks himself already full to his eyeballs with pure truth reasoned via science. But all the while, not only is he missing the basic alchemical principle, he chooses to disregard the forethought brought upon by our past, by ancient peoples who we now think are merely outdated relics of knowledge. True knowledge about health can be found not through quote-unquote new ideas, but through a deeper search into the fundamental states of things. Health must be treated through holistic methods, but we rely on allopathy because it gives a fast, instant gratification results. Plastic surgery is deeply unhealthy. Pills offer relief that is only temporary. The truth is, even removing a tumor is unhealthy unless necessary to save someone's life. What is the alchemical principle? Proper preservation of food and allocation of the body's energy, as I talked about in this video which I will link. If we could master health, not only could we live longer and happier lives, but we could reduce the amount of doctors necessary to treat people dramatically, because the only things that we'd really need treatments would be like accidents that happen in car crashes, instead of ailments such as Alzheimer's. And it's possible you may be asking, like, why would you want to reduce the number of jobs that exist? And honestly, that's just like the biggest facepalm to me. Yes, society as it currently functions cannot tolerate a significant loss of jobs in any sector unless they are replaced by something else. But that is just an outmoded way of thinking, as I talked about in this video. Like, I really think tradition is one of the most damaging things to society as it currently stands. It makes it hard for us to think outside of the small world of thoughts that we are currently immersed in. Traditional thought goes back to what I was saying about the cult of anti-intellectualism. It is an abandonment of logos in favor of ethos. We, as a collective, expect the so-called experts to know everything for us, so we choose to listen to them and not to actually apply the rigor of thought required to develop our own opinions. Many people will choose some kind of a dominant ideology without really knowing why, usually being the result of their parental influences. This is easily observable in the way that people vote, which leads to the tyrannical ideological force aside from tradition, which is conformism. It's a force that the Catholic Church used against the idea of heliocentrism and allowed racism to flourish unabated. Maybe our ideas have evolved, but human nature remains unchanged. Ideologically, we are still babies because, as I said, we have relegated our thinking to other people, so-called experts. This is why relativism, as spoken about by Terence McKenna, is such a prevalent force today, and it's one of the biggest quips I take up with Joe Rogan, who is otherwise one of my favorite people. Obviously, he's an interviewer, so in a way he has to do this to have the platform he does. Relativism, if you aren't already aware, basically means your idea is as good as anyone else's, that all ideas are essentially created equal. There's a merit to this idea, and it's a tendency for it to allow differing parties to find peace through coexisting. But I take a fundamental opposition to this notion. Philosophy should be more dangerous than a nuclear bomb, but the battlefield must be in the minds and the souls of people who engage in critical thinking, rather than in physical battlefields. Relativism disarms and neuters the philosopher and treats us all as perfectly valid. This creates the world you see today, the miasma of social relativism which hinders my progress as an intellectual juggernaut. Let me make it completely clear what I mean by social relativism. You don't matter. You are not an object in the equation of progress except that you can be a vessel for the furtherance of its objective. And that objective will be outlined by me in the most plain language I can muster for optimal cultural digestion. If you have disagreements with any of my opinions, I will not respect your judgments, or come forth to grapple with them. If I am wrong about anything, which I very well may be, it is not significant enough to dismiss the larger portion of what I am right about, and that by itself is significant enough to initiate an entire cultural overhaul. I don't want to come off as an egotistical person, but I will employ whatever means necessary to enforce my position. To quote Radiohead, this goes beyond me, beyond you. Don't be a dreamer who is just happy to serve the best interests of the system which has grown over your psyche like some parasite. I am fully encouraging you towards your best interest, away from said parasite. I can perfectly gauge how you feel about this already. To this I merely state that it is the force of traditional thinking that has trapped you into thinking my ideas are far too radical, and I would quote author Kurt Vonnegut to represent how I feel about this problem. Quote, "What do you expect? For generations they've been built up to worship competition and the market, productivity and economic usefulness and the envy of their fellow man, and boom, it's all yanked out from under them. They can't participate, can't be useful anymore. Their whole culture's been shot to hell." End quote. So you can see why I view tradition as a negative thing when I want to alter drastically the ways we think about health, spirituality, and politics in such a way to effectively render modern culture obsolete. How do you think people are going to feel realizing that billions of years of evolution is currently being spearheaded by an army of one, a single young adult? I live in an entirely different world from you. It is necessary that I be here, not only do I have to process data in a different status than that which you do, but also because there is a desperate attempt being made against me and everything I stand for in all moments of every day. It matters not to me whether I take pride in this, because the state I am in is not designed to procure anything material from your world. I, in a way, already have everything I ever wanted except my peace of mind. My grandmother once said to me, "It's like your mind is always on fire." And it's good for me to know that someone could actually see through to me that way, because in that same fashion you will grow to know that all I have ever pursued is truth and mutual understanding. And she is right. Since I was 16, my mind has been on fire, looking for some things that are now entirely too simple. Now I'm in my mid-20s, and my mind is still on fire, despite having found the key things of importance. So why am I like this? Well, first off, I have something called ODD, or oppositional defiant disorder. I immediately see the flaws of everyone before I see anything else in them. To me, ODD is an important asset, not necessarily a disorder. I need to see flaws because you can't hit what you can't see, as they say. But they are moving targets and require intense studying in order to predict and understand, because people are unpredictable and do not always abide by simple logic to guide their actions. In observance of Terence McKenna's great wisdom, I want to quote him in saying, "Pride is a sin." And again, I will quote him to say, "Culture and ideology are not your friends. People are tribal and self-centered. When you look around at the world, you are seeing the repercussions of dominance games, yet this is not how things are phrased to you." And to quote Alan Watts' wisdom, the biggest hoax of all is thinking that the way society is organized is anything but a game. But it becomes fairly obvious when you look at the most idealized things you should want to pursue. If you could have anything you would want, a yacht, a big mansion, a luxurious car, jewelry, plastic surgery to make you look good, a high place in some kind of organization, a trophy wife, and all of these things serve to honor the gods of vanity. This is an atrocity. Disregard for a moment all the consequences in the real world of your selfish desire for these things, and put those who make it possible for you to live this life below you, and think just of the nature of what wanting these things implies. I've got 2 words for you: status symbols. You want these things not necessarily because the things themselves actually make you happy, but specifically because it is hard for you to get them, and by getting something others cannot, you fulfill the social expectation to achieve something. This is what you've been taught to achieve the recognition of your peers, the conquest of the complex game of life we weave through our every action and inaction. It harkens back to that scene in Fight Club, where the main character is outlining how he spent all his money collecting frivolous furniture items, and then dives into a destructive reaction to the wussification of society. I still remember the scene of Tyler Durden saying, "You're not your job, you're not how much money you have in the bank, you're not the car you drive, you're not the contents of your wallet, you're not your effing khakis, you're the all-singing, all-dancing crap of the world." It burnt into my mind when I first watched that movie as a teenager, and still rings true in a deep way to me today. You want things to identify with because it fills some kind of a void filled with conformist ideals. Maybe you've heard of something called selective hearing. In any logical discourse, which should, of course, be the norm any time your judgment may fall harshly upon another conscious being, let you create a victim to your own ideological preferences, this is a type of evil which abides by the same principles which I just spoke upon with the individual, but it can in this way be applied to the group by drowning out anyone who is opposed to the zeitgeist as it stands. Though I have spoken to many different people, I am certain none of them have truly heard me. Even in the comments I see plenty of people disagreeing, but no one actually articulating why they personally believe I am wrong. The deeper truth I've come to contend with, when trying to outline my beliefs to people, is that their ideology is essentially a false light. They can't consciously acknowledge it, but to put it simply, they are evil. Yes, evil. Not because they go out and hurt people, but because they want to refuse to acknowledge even the possibility, not the fact, but alone the possibility, that their worldview could be in any way wrong. It's rather like telling an inventor who has worked his whole life on a faulty invention the fruitless nature of his efforts, and upon finding out he would, if he were a righteous man, of course find a new path to take, but in his lust for whatever force misguides his sense of reality into believing that his own ego and his own experiences are the end-all be-all for him, his will is subjugated to infinite confusion. All human strife ultimately comes down to the same concepts: ignorance of facts and refusal of facts. And to whatever end a particular party can demonize the other in the process of doing these 2 acts of violence, as they should righteously be known as, remember that even Hitler was upheld as a model human being in areas where you can control information and doctrine, the more evils of man can proliferate. I don't mean to sound negative. In fact, I don't even have an ounce of bad news for anyone. I don't care. I just want to speak my piece and then be left alone so I can enjoy the great fruits of truth and hopefully allow those in my proximity to gain the same understanding, or at least be accepting of me. Like, to grossly simplify things, I'm saying you can eat whatever you want, you don't have to work, and you can connect doing the things you love with real spiritual productivity. I'm not saying that your current view of reality does not work, but it is analogous to an imitation of what the real thing is. The fundamental problem is one of good and evil, and how neither of them should really functionally exist if we deduce best practices and always adhere to those. That is to say, selfishness is like an attribute which will resonate with different levels of a person's proclivity towards or away from the ability to actively overpower the will of other people. But the reality is most people would gladly make enormous sacrifices of others' well-being for their own gain if there is no law or obstruction. This is a point made clear for your entertainment all the time thanks to movies like Saw, but what I want to posit is that this situation would, in my ordained utopia, not be a necessary hypothetical in the slightest. The current theorem of reality is inexorable from game theory, and is inexorable from the lives of anyone who participates in society. With the application of right thought, there is no need for anyone to sacrifice their own well-being. This is particularly applicable if you believe in the laws of karma, as I do, which essentially say what you do ends up doing you. What this basically amounts to is a proof that evil is a fallacy of logic. Maybe you can improve your life slightly by the sacrifice of others, but in a perfect society, as I am trying to imagine it, the amount it could potentially improve is negated by the understanding that your karmic baggage acquired from said sacrifice is not worth it. I know other people say that good and evil will always exist, but I disagree from the standpoint that we can actually evolve beyond the need for conflict philosophically, and as a moral imperative. But even if you suppose everything was to go according to my plans and restructured society in perfect form, there would still be a recurrent issue that there will be bad people. And these people, in their power-hungry mania, will create problems, not just at the level of the instances of crime, but the potential for corruption. Well, my rebuttal to that is not different to my rebuttal to the criticism of automated vehicles not being able to be free of potential flaws. That is, it doesn't actually have to be free of flaws, it just has to be better than the average human. So I say, if again things go according to plan, not only would there be less crime because people would overall be more contented, but also less corruption because there will be less room for corruption to exist. Of course, no system can be truly immune to the potential existence of threats from both inside and outside, but I think the evils of human nature are not written into our genetic code as much as they are a response to our environment. I am a utopian idealist. This has garnered me criticism from all sources my entire life, but my ideals go down to the root, deep in the human psyche. Not only do I aspire to make my ideals known and well received, but to destroy the very core essence of that which has created the various burdens and boundaries that hindered my ability to achieve my goals. That does not mean to state, as I said in this video, that I would force anyone to do what I believe in right, but to do everything I can to make it apparent that there is truth in my beliefs, because I know and have experienced their benefits. But anyway, there's nothing special about me. My view is that, in a way, the greatest impediment to my success would be that it would be mine, that I would become famous. I have alone granted you all the knowledge you need to solve all the world problems, but you are occupied with a game. It's a game less visible can tell you about for more time than worth elaborating, but the gist of it goes, my shit is wider than your shit. So here is one of his takes on it, which I will link. It's really as simple as anything else. I need to convince you of something. Yes, as in need. Why? Because I believe in the premise of logic holding foremost authority in any given situation. Is this of any consequence to me? Not directly. No, as far as my own life goes, I have already carved my own sense of truth into it, but helping others get there is, regardless, something that would bring me another sense of satisfaction. I often run into this fun stepping stone, people saying, you're just one person. This doesn't mean anything, at all. All you're telling me is that your society offers bad tech support. To that end, I would likely have to convince you to as well. So that very lane, I will tell you that you have failed. So just tell it to me straight, Doc. I can't get anyone to believe me because I don't have money, because I'm young or defiant, or whatever it is you like to stereotype me as today. None of this has anything to do with logic, of course. The strange thing here is this. I find that there is a certain narrative which exists. It is confounded and mismanaged, and mostly a straight appeal to whatever you, the general population, find to be most comforting, whatever gets you to sleep at night, as John Lennon said. Not to divulge, but the general impression upon culture is paradoxical if you bring up Lenin. Peace and love are great, right? But to the end, we have to actually acknowledge anything outside of our own small sphere of reality. We are hopeless to offer much more than platitudes. Nothing is really under our control. It's rather telling how the Beatles' philosophy of peace and love is both celebrated, yet underapplied, that we encounter such a fun sort of facetious idealism in the face of our problems today. Because the point is this. none of that optimism matters. None of these celebrity personas or chantings of peace and love and all that amounts to anything unless you first apply the simple rule of thumb, the guiding principles of logic as we know them. And the buck seems to come to a stop immediately when it comes to anything which either challenges the norm of what we believe or makes the reader feel like he has in any way to commit or discipline himself to make progress. Real progress. Not the phony kind you see in all these charities and events in the name of so-and-so cause. My journey for truth has been full of tumult, and I wish I could give you a perfect explanation of everything I experienced, but even if I had perfect memory, it would hardly be worth the effort. I've learned from arguing with enough people that whatever your side is, no matter how innocuous or righteous you may be, there is always a complication someone can throw at you to demerit your good intent. Because the great evil of all time is believing that all men have virtue, that somewhere in their hearts there is a shred of empathy. If I could make one statement clear to you, it would be that it's simply not so. To the degree one person makes himself a black hole is always under their control, and may vary from a lot to a little, but there is no guiding light, no God above to tell you that that person's virtue will come out right in the end. Sometimes good things just fail, and it is with that black truth that I will leave you for now.